Hi, I'm Shauna Lampi-Legaree, and winter has gone. Snap! We took a long flight and we have found summer in Sydney, Australia. And we are here for the next few months, and so my videos will be coming from here. And the last video I put out, I did a color study of Bufflehead Ducks. This is actually the finished painting that I created for the Wildlife Habitat Canada Duck Stamp Competition for 2024, but it was painted in 2022. Take a moment to subscribe, like the video, let's grab our paint tools, and let's get going. I'm starting to build up the background, layer by layer, using a method called BSM, which stands for Bateman Sponge Method. I learned this technique from Robert Bateman himself in 2019 when I took a master class with him. He developed this method as a way to be able to create very smooth backgrounds that graduate, shifting values along the way. The gradation can go from top to bottom or bottom to top, left to right or right to left, just as long as the values step from dark to light. I created a mixture in which I use 50% water and 50% airbrush medium to thin the paint. As a result, each layer of paint is fairly transparent. It will take about 5 to 7 layers to get the background covering to where I will be satisfied with it. I use the sponge to blend the paint. I carefully move from the dark to the light, tapping very gently, and then continue back from the light to the dark. It's really important to do the back and forth directions with the sponge. If you mistakenly go from dark to light and then pick up your sponge and move it over to the dark side to go back and do it, you're going to introduce light paint onto the dark side, and that will be a problem. So no going to the dark side. I take a few moments to dry each layer using my hair blower so that I can get on to the next layer. I notice that the right side needs to be a little bit lighter. I put more paint on using the sponge to blend it in. The subtle gradation goes from left where it is darker to the right side where it is lighter. Once I light the background, I will let it dry for at least a day. With the combination of water and airbrush medium, I feel that it's important to let the paint solidly dry through. I know that it's acrylic and that acrylic dries quickly, but I still want to make sure that I'm not transferring the drawing too quickly on the freshly painted background. Here's the drawing transferred on the board. I'm ready to begin painting. That's so exciting. Beginning with the reeds in the background, as I work always from back to front. This painting was created as an entry into the Wildlife Habitat Canada Duck Stamp Competition. In 1985, Robert Bateman was the first Canadian artist whose work was chosen to be on the inaugural duck stamp. The painting that I'm working on is actually for the 2024 stamp competition, even though I'm painting it in 2022. The announcement of the painting that will be on the 2024 stamp will be on April 1st, 2024. But this April, in 2023, they will be announcing the winner from the 2021 competition. They are always a couple of years ahead. Creating stamps takes a significant amount of time and preparation. We happened to be traveling in southern Canada when I had this thought pop into my head about the competition. Due to a very busy summer, I had forgotten to look for the competition for the 2024 duck stamp. And when I got online, I discovered that the deadline to indicate interest in participating was only 2 hours away from closing. I quickly filled out the documents and entered my intent to participate. I did a separate email as well, just to ensure that my intent to participate wasn't missed. I knew I had pictures of buffleheads back at home, but I couldn't remember what they looked like. Even though I wasn't sure about the reference images I had, I still wanted to participate. I knew that this year's competition for me would be more like a trial run. My goals were several. One, I was going to make the October 28th deadline. Two, I knew that I was going to do a lot of learning through this process, so I wanted to give myself a little more leeway than I usually would. And three, I was trying not to put too much pressure on myself, which isn't always as easy for me to do. Here I am working on the female duck. There are very clear requirements for the duck stamp competition. There has to be a female-male duck in breeding season. The artist needs to ensure that their painting includes the breeding habitat of the particular kind of waterfowl. The Canadian stamp competition only has one option for painting, and this time it was Bufflehead Ducks. Once I got home, I realized fairly quickly that I didn't have very many pictures of actual habitat. When I'm out, I mostly focus in on the birds that I'm photographing with a bit of habitat for context. From my research, I knew that Bufflehead ducks nest in old woodpecker holes high up in trees. I really didn't have any pictures that included trees in the spring. And as it was already August when I put my name forward, I really couldn't go back in time to take the relevant reference images. As I went through my photos, I figured out that I needed to amalgamate two different images so that I could get the Bufflehead duck pair together. Thankfully, the light was similar in both images. I'm still quite a beginner in using the program called Affinity while designing my painting. As you can see, I'm working on the first layer of water, starting on the reflections. Reflections on water are darker than the actual birds are. I'm very carefully painting in the reflection information during the first pass. As this painting is for a competition, it means that I am being very particular and working very slowly. I continue to look back and forth from my reference image to the painting. I work site size, and that means that my reference image is the exact same size as the board that I'm painting on. This makes it much easier to see all the detail information and to know if I'm getting the shapes put in correctly. Building up the first layer is not about being perfect. It's the second and third pass that will allow me to correct and add those very subtle value shifts. The first pass is about getting the values as close as correct as possible, as well as the shapes. When I prepared the background paint mixtures, I made large amounts of it so that I have extra, and that will allow me to clean up any edges if I need to. Notice that the reflection is distorted because the water is shifting and changing, and there are different values being reflected in different parts of the water. I really enjoy painting water as it's so complex, and if I do it well, it looks very cool. Water is such an amazing subject matter to paint. It is never the same twice. Sometimes it's silvery, other times it can be pale blue, or it can be deep blue with clouds and nearby trees being reflected on it. I could spend a lifetime just painting water and maybe have more of an understanding of it at the end of that lifetime. It's very helpful to have good reference images to work from when painting water. Generally, I can't make it up out of my head because the water just doesn't look real if I try to make it up. There are other artists who have done so many paintings of water that they have a visual memory that they can work from. That is a really deep understanding of water. I have found that painting water is really about abstract, interconnected shapes. I continue to build those abstract shapes, knowing that in the end they will correctly represent water. I go back and forth, moving around the painting surface. There is a little wave being pushed forward in front of the ducks. As I paint that area in front of the female duck, I'm not worried about the value being exactly correct. I focus on getting the shapes correct in this first pass. I have a second brush that I'm using to blend the wet paint before it dries and to clean up any of the edges where the paint has moved beyond where I want it to be. I was finding it hard to retain information of what I was seeing between the time my eyes looked at the reference and back to the painting. The distance that my eyes had to flit back and forth was too great. To deal with that, at some point I will be adding part of the reference image that's been cut out onto the painting surface with all of the water reflections. I did attempt to create a more complex setup with one habitat image that I had, but I was wholly dissatisfied with the results. That distinct lack of proper habitat reference images was a hindrance for this painting. As I was only working from my own images, I had to keep with a very simple design this year. That way I could do the very best work possible given the constraints that I was working under. There are definite requirements for entry. Invited artists must submit only one original entry. Entries must be original multicolored painting. Kind of failed on that part right away in the artist's choice of medium. And they had specific sizes to work from so that the painting would lend itself to fitting into a stamp. This also means that the final painting needs to be horizontal. I ended up working with a 12 to 18 inch board, though I did buy the 12 by 16, the 11 by 14, and the 6 by 8 inch boards just to be on the safe side. I live 1,700 kilometers away from the nearest art store. The painting is to portray the eligible waterfowl species, migratory game bird, in its breeding plumage and its natural habitat during breeding season. The habitat of the species had to be clearly defined. I think that means a landscape design must be incorporated into the painting along with the traditional part of painting a waterfowl. Another big consideration is how the winning painting will be cropped and to make sure that you include an area for the text that's going to be on the stamps. I generally find it a real challenge to work to a limited theme. I'm very particular about working only from my own images. One major reason is that I have a story about my experience around seeing and photographing the bird, which then connects fully to the final painting. Every one of my paintings has a story. The reeds were very simple. I did need to add some more reeds on the left-hand side. I'm not exactly sure I was completely satisfied with them, but it's all learning, and I'm happy that I did the painting and made the deadline. It takes quite a while to get the water reflections in place in this painting because it's such a complex area. This painting is a pair of Bufflehead ducks just gliding along a small patch of open water with ice close by and on a very cloudy day. If there was any amount of sunshine on the male, then I could have painted the most amazing iridescent colors on his head. I did get some iridescence painted in, but later on during the painting process. Here I come to the underneath of the water on the Bufflehead male. I do love how much white is reflected into the water because the body of the male is so white. With using the third image to get the reeds in, I only realized later as I was painting that the water had been moving differently in the other image that I was working with, which caused the reflections to be more squiggly, and I needed to make the reflections look like the other ones that I had already painted. Here I place the reference image of the reflection of water underneath so that I can lean back in my chair to compare the reflection that I'm painting to the actual image. See that I have placed the male duck head right next to the one that I'm painting? I needed to see it closer. I was struggling with the distance between the reference image, then turning my head back to the painting and trying to retain what angle I needed to paint. Water takes an extraordinarily long time to work out. These are really cute little ducks. Being quite small is helpful when nesting up in a tree. I think it would be pretty cool to see the little ones come out of their woodpecker hole and start their journey to the water. I'm thinking that I might need to switch my focus for a time to practice doing landscape paintings with birds being a small part of the final image. I love the white patch on the female's cheek. I do adore painting birds. There is so many different kinds, and I regularly head out to take reference images. Right now I'm in Australia. Since arriving, my reference images include kookaburras, noisy miners, rainbow lorikeets, and Australian white ibis, funnily known as bin chickens here. That is only with one day out birding. There is plenty more to come yet. When thinking about the male duck, I planned the values that I would work with. The reflection value needs to be the darkest value. I paint the darkest part with value 2. I never use pure black in any of my paintings. Then I know that the duck needs to be slightly lighter, so the darkest value I will work with on the duck is value 3, just one step lighter than the reflection. Though the duck has lots of white, I'm not actually using pure white at all. I use value 9, maybe a little bit of value 9.5, which is pretty close to pure white. At the end of the process, I might use a bit of pure white in very tiny amounts that I will blend out in small areas. Now on to working on the water in front of the male duck. Now I'm creating the edge of the ice near the water. Add some of the highlights that I'm seeing on the ice that has not started to melt yet. In this particular year that I took these images, it was still very cold outside. The date was May 15th. I actually have photos of snow machines running the gauntlet over a little bit of water and then onto the still solid ice of a smaller lake in Yellowknife. And to add insult to injury, it started to snow. I have to say, it was more than a bit disheartening to have such a late spring. I don't mind winter at all, but when it is May, then spring needs to be here. Working on the reeds here. There are a few things I would change in this design now that I'm editing the video, but that is with hindsight, and really the painting is done, so I will just move on. Finally, I start to work on the subtle surface ripples as a slight breeze is moving the top of the water. This painting is really subdued in gray. It was the light that I had on that particular day, but then there was the complete lack of spring growth and the abundant ice still around, which makes for very little color to reflect into the water. As I paint, I go from a little blue liner brush, putting a small dab of paint in place, then I use the white brush to soften the paint. Acrylic paint dries so quickly that this is the only way that I can create those subtle shifts that I am seeing. I'm well into my second pass on the reflections of the water. I'll add the more dramatic lighter values at 9.5 that I'm seeing in different places, and then on to the darker areas. Here I am putting on the very subtle iridescence on the male. To see the male with its brilliant iridescent head, head over to my blog at dancingravenstudio.ca. Thank you for subscribing and for all of your support. I'll see you in the next art video.